Yes. Well, right now we just see a black screen.
Le partage est en pause. Wait. Oh. It doesn't want to work. Ah, now it's okay?
Yes. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Ben, for the invitation. I have just to say that I'm a bit tired. We just submit a competition. And so I hope that I will be clear enough for everybody. I will just go through different projects that we are working on or that we did since the beginning of our office. We started in 2015. We are 3 associates and now 6 or 7, no, 7 collaborators working with us. And what we do is that we work on really different scales. From architecture, we do urban researches too. And also now we are starting different things about furniture and how actually furniture can also relate to a practice. So I will try just really simply to go through a few projects. And I will start with our, with our first project that we started in 2015 and that we just finished now. So it's a apartment extension, kind of roof pavilion. It took quite a long time to do, even though it's quite modest for many reasons. That's not the topic now. But what I will try to explain is our fascination about how architecture can relate on different scales, on domestics, but also on the city, and how we position ourselves in this great game that architecture is. So that's not the image, but that was our context. Do you see the mouse on the screen?
Yes.
Yes. So we were contacted, that was our first project, we were contacted by a client that bought a small apartment here in this kind of typical Belgian context where you have street alignments and then something really weird happens somehow. And they asked us just to make an access to the roof, to make a big terrace. And what we said is that maybe it's a possibility to do something more and to extend their domestic space. Sorry. So what we proposed was a kind of rectangular terrace with a building on it. The context, sorry for the image, it's a PDF. But for the context, just to understand, there were 2 party walls, one really high, one lower. And what we propose is to make a small building on it that doesn't touch actually this facade, but that's surrounded by 2 outside spaces. And why we've done that, it's because what we understood is that the apartment that we renovated, the apartment was quite detached from the upper level. We had to the height that we had to get was like around 5 meters. So there was really not a lot of link that we could do, but a staircase. And so we wanted to really do a kind of object that's autonomous, that's in between the domestic landscape that they had under, but also that relates to the city. And so I will pass it quickly. So basically there are simple stairs that connect the upper level. And then when you go on the level, what you have is a kind of small kitchen with a huge terrace, but also this weird small space that's not totally logical when you propose to the client that you will have another facade that you'll have pay for it. It's kind of struggle, but we were pretty sure that detaching this small building will make it a kind of a real architecture and not just an extension or just a roof. And so when you see it, you have this kind of small moments where you have a toilet that has a huge window facing the wall with this door. So on one side you have the feeling that, yeah, you have this view towards the wall, but it's you understand that you're in a building, in a volume, autonomous volume in itself. And then on the other side, it opens up towards the city. And so we had a lot of fun with small details, with those stairs and this kitchen going around and this kind of. What we are also interested in was to make a kind of building that's a bit generic in a way, that has small details, but that has also this terrace that has not a lot of stuff designed, but this small lamp that gives a kind of domestic intention to it, but at the same time it relates to this kind of lighting that you can find on the streets. So the building is quite generic, like I said, but what we did, we spent a lot of time of doing small refined details that you can see on the upper right edge. And so what we were really interested in is to make this kind of in-between architecture. So you see that basically you have the existing building that had not really strong architecture. So it wasn't, our choice wasn't to try to do like mimetics or try to work with the existing architecture, but to do this kind of in-between that corresponds to a larger scale, the scale of the city. And this is something that Brussels has, because it's kind of a chaotic city. So you have different extensions, different elements, and we really liked this idea of this in-between scale that actually when you look at this building, it's something that could be somewhere else, that has its own qualities, but at the same time, yeah, it relates to the domestics and to the city. Second project that it's now built, it's email. It was a competition that we won with our friends from NP2F. And it was, the program was a Center for Arts, Sciences, Technology, Innovation and Inclusion. It was kind of a big program for a former, what was it? Former factory, sorry. And basically they were asking for a digital art center, so exhibition spaces, but also a Fab Lab. And a Fab Lab that was inclusive because it's in a really poor neighborhood. And so the idea was to make workshops with people from the neighborhood. So that was the former factory. It's next to the Brussels Canal. And when we visited the building, there was already this art center that was on the first floor. And the only entrance that it had was this small door with just this email writing here on the facade. So really small, no relation to the outside. But when we were visiting this building, behind it, you had this incredible space that we really liked. That basically, it's a space that from one glance, you can already imagine all the activities that could happen in this center. And so that was something that we were quite interested in, is how do we relate to the city? So this is a small map where in blue you have all the cultural program in Brussels, and in red you have everything that's those small productive factories that exist in Brussels. And so actually, how do you take this Fab Lab plus the exhibition spaces together? And at the same time, how do you relate to a bigger scale? So what we proposed was simply to take the street and to literally make it enter the building, and then a kind of simple renovation of the rest of the building. And at the same time, within a really scarce budget, we were thinking about how to make a kind of architecture that can at the same time have its own autonomy, but that relates also to the building. And so this is the building. Those are the collages that we proposed for the competition. So basically we propose to open the facade and to make two windows, one which was fixed and one that could open totally. And then behind this window, you see that there is a kind of weird steel structure. And that was the idea, to make the city enter into the building and to make a small architecture that can put in relation all the program and articulate the different uses of the building. What's important to say is that the program wasn't so defined during the competition, and then during the process when we won, the program changed a lot. But this small architecture and the power of the space that we've created somehow remained and was able actually to handle those programmatic changes. So that was the section of the competition. So we had this, we created this 3 height space around it were different programs revolving. And what was particular is that we didn't have this first floor here that you see in black, which then changed because we recuperated this floor and all the program actually went from the 0 level to the first one. The Fab Lab was first on the ground floor, as you can see here. So you had the entrance, the Fab Lab, and some public activities like workshops facing the streets. But then it changed. The exhibition space came on the ground floor. There was a small bar and then a kind of conference room. Here, the same on the first level, big changes, the structure remains. Everything was actually during the process evolving, but still this small space that was this kind of strong link to the city that we really pushed for. And so that was the proposal, is that the space was strong, but basically what we wanted is not an architecture that was heavy, but something like a filter. So we proposed this kind of steel structure that from first glance, when you enter the space, you can see all the activities revolving around it. And so this is the actual situation. All the images that you will see are images just before it was totally done. So it's a bit messy, but we like this idea that you have this refined element and then the rest can be a bit generic again, or just renovated as we were able to do. This is the entrance now. So you have this huge door that for the day of the opening, they were opening it totally, and people from the street, even though they didn't know about the center, were entering this space. And when you enter the space, you have this, this structure. You have the link with this courtyard that I was showing to you in the beginning. And at the same time, you have this materiality that we wanted really like a filter. And so what we did is that we it took quite a lot of time to define this micro-perforated aluminum in order to have this kind of control of transparency. So how it works when you have a lot of light front of those elements is quite opaque. And when you put a lot of light behind the element, it's getting totally transparent. So here you see this triple height. And then the rest of the spaces, so the Fab Lab and all the spaces for the resident, because you have artists in residence there, were quite generic, just put on norms and creating simple spaces that were quite functional. So here you see the view from the Fab Lab towards the street. So even if you have this structure, this steel element, you see that it's totally transparent from this point of view. And then we had a lot of fun with different architectural elements, because we always think in this kind of processes that because you don't have a lot of money, you have to put it on some elements. And so for us, it was this, steel structure and also those small staircases. So it's what you see here. This is the transparency of it. And what we also really liked is, even though the building is quite rough, we really wanted to be extremely precise on some elements. So it's what you see here, the CNC cut small steel elements that take exactly the sinusoidal of the steel plates. And that basically are the counterpart of this more kind of functional generic intervention. So this kind of idea between generics and specificity is something that we are also developing now on bigger scale projects. We are working on 2 schools, one in Wallonia and one in Vlaanderen. And normally the building will start in the beginning of this year. So with the context, we're not in the city. It was in this kind of suburbia, around Brussels. And so you had 2 contexts. One context here was for a kindergarten and a primary school, quite a huge building for 900 students. And the one on the right was for a professional school with different workshops like carpentry, horticulture, construction and different classrooms. And so this first context, I will explain it briefly, is this typical Belgian village context, let's say, where you have a former church with different buildings with a football field behind and some greenery remaining. And so that was the site of the first school. And the other one was more a kind of agricultural area with not really big landscape qualities. So the first building, what we proposed is here when you see the number 1, it's what you see here, to destroy one of the buildings that was here, to make 2 piazzas and to make 2 entrances. So one entrance was for the primary school that you see here in yellow, and the other entrance was for the kindergarten. This was only on 1 level and having a strong relationship to the topography and to the landscape. The third one is the administration, and on the ground level, we had all the public programs that could also serve during weekends, not just only for the school, but for the town of Dilbeek. That in their center, they didn't have any real public space. So there's no piazza, nothing. So this could become the kind of small centrality of the village. So that's the building that you see with those 2 piazzas, with the primary school here, administration, and then the kindergarten sunken into the topography, 2 piazzas. That's the plan that you see. So with those 2 entrances, so here for the kindergarten and here for the primary school. And so it has made this kind of weird building with a huge roof that here is totally in gray, but normally it's a green roof. And under, in this kind of a huge structure, so you have to imagine that you have to make a kindergarten for 20 classes, which is quite huge. And so how actually you can deal with this generic structure and make some interesting small scale situation, architectural situations. So that's something that I will explain a bit later. This is the one of Templeuve. So different programs, like I said, 4 different workshops with classrooms. And what we propose basically is a huge roof under which you have the classes and the workshops that here you see in color, which are particular singular objects with their own qualities. So this is the model without the roof that you see. So there's a kind of inner street with different patios lighting up it. And then you have those roofs of the workshops that are poking out of the roof. So it's this, those are the 2 models of the 2 schools. So you see here the roof and the specific elements going up. This school, it's more in the plan that the specificity starts in the structure. So it's what you see here. If you compare the 2 plans, is that you have those small moments of articulation, small situation that try to give another scale to the building. And for Templeuve, it's the same, even though if it's in this kind of strict geometry, we have a lot of small articulating moments that we created. So that's always this question that we have when we work on small scales, but also on bigger scales, is how to make situations, but with the architectural elements. We really love this image of Aldo van Eyck that in one image, it resumes actually everything that we want to do in architecture. So you have a kind of straight structural thinking, a moment of use, a situation, but also a link to a bigger landscape, let's say. And at the same time, this musical part that you see here, we are really interested in this idea of the grid, so the structure of something that has to rhythm the building for many technical, functional, special reasons, and how inside this we can make variations. And so it's something that we call adapted grid. It's not like a new idea or anything, but it's something that we try to do. And when you look at this, this is the structural plan of Templeuve, and here you understand quite well the building in the sense that all those elements in black are the workshops. Sometimes you have 1 column in the middle, sometimes it's just a really simple space. And then you have all the columns here, inside which then you will have classrooms and then walls in between. And those columns are actually articulating themselves. They are changing position, they are changing size. For example, where you have an entrance and in the cafeteria, the structural elements are bending a bit themselves. So you start to have different levels of considerations through the structure. And that's something that we quite like. And that, for example, we try to have in those two schools. So you see here this small cafeteria, but also you see here structural elements that actually are giving another rhythm, another scale to this huge agglomerate of classrooms. So those are the small moments. And in the workshops, in the Templar School, what we wanted to do is that you need really like functional, simple, concrete spaces. And it's more the roof that was bringing different characters, different light, different atmospheres. So this idea about the scale, I think that it's quite well resumed in this drawing that Valletta has made for us. Normally, when you're an architect student, you're working with different documents in order to go through all those scale attention. So you will have a drawing, I don't know, a plan, a general plan, section, a small scheme that will speak more about the idea, and then different details. And here what we like with this kind of drawing is that when you start to enter the project, you understand that actually all the intentions that you had are starting to blend one in each other, and that you have different moments, architectural ones that exist, but also small uses. And it's something that we find quite fascinating with this kind of drawings, is that here a shovel or this actually takes the same importance as the architecture in itself, and it's something that we want to achieve, is kind of grasping all the scales of the project in one document, in one idea, but also in one architecture. So how actually complexity can be crystallized in architecture. So that's something that we really like to do. And then just to finish, I will be quick. This is a project that we started during the COVID. We were talking with friends about a kind of general frustration that, during the COVID, all the building sites stopped, and architecture is something that takes really a lot of time to do. And so we just wanted to make a kind of project, a collaborative project, where we can be quite quick in making objects through direct fascinations. Because I was talking about the complexity of architecture. Architecture is really a complex work to be achieved. And here what we wanted is to be quite direct. So what we did is that we proposed to 40 people, architects and artists, mostly friends. Ahmed is part of this project, to choose one object of fascination or a work of fascination, and then basically to make from it a kind of form that will become a small piece of furniture. And so what we did is that we contacted during this COVID through mail all those people, and we proposed them a kind of protocol, a thinking protocol, and then we propose to make the making protocol. And so the thinking protocol is basically what we asked is to choose one object of fascination. It can be a painting. In this case, this is mine. I will explain it a bit. And in this painting, to find a kind of form that could fascinate us, to write a text about the relation between the painting and the form of it, and then to send us a really simple drawing of what could become a kind of coffee side table. And then what we have proposed is to make the production of it. So this is an ongoing process. A few tables are made, but I think that in 6 months we'll be able to have all of those elements done. So it's a CNC cut aluminum sheet, which is a second-hand aluminum sheet that then we polish in quite a long process, and then we wax it, and then you have this kind of small elements that have their own characteristical form. Those are the 40 different fascinations that, the collaborators or the participators have proposed to us. You see that there is not a lot of architecture. Basically, when you ask two architects to talk about something that they are fascinated by, they go more to something exterior than architecture, which was quite something that we quite expected and we were happy to see. And from there, each of these images becomes a form in itself and a potential table. So it's not a functional object. It's really to try to transform this kind of fascination into a form that can get direct into a physical aspect. And I will just show a few of them. So this is basically my fascination for this price drawing, where I've chosen two simple forms in it that has become this table. I really liked Ahmed's proposal, where actually there was a kind of shadow in this atelier of Ellsworth Kelly studio. There's a beautiful text with it, but I will not go deep in it. But then he has chosen this simple form. Another friend took this Emilio Riviera installation and took from the Francis Alice painting just those two hands, because he's fascinated by the communication and by hands and kind of world, not architecture, not paintings, but this kind of world of interaction between humans. So this is the Ahmed small table. And you see those hands here. Kevin and Fabi, something much more formal. Let get. And so, yeah. And so those are a few images that show actually the kind of spectrum of objects, of real objects that we have obtained. And this is the corpus. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe we switch directly to Office S&M and then we go for questions all together. Sounds good.
So we're going to try and do it from my computer. So I'll just... can everyone see that?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Cool.
Yes, so you want to go first, Hugh?
Yeah, thanks very much for having us along to speak today and to join in with the crits as well. So I'm Hugh McEwen, and you've met Katrina Stewart already, and together we run a practice called Office S&M. We're a young practice of 4 people based in Hackney in London, and we produce architecture to kind of provide. We have a split of work between public and private projects. We kind of try and keep a 50-50 split between the two. And this covers kind of private residential, one-off houses, housing, and then in the public sphere, kind of public realm, working with local councils and high street regeneration. But through all our projects, we really see colour as a building material, just as much as kind of bricks and mortar. And I think we want to kind of talk you through a couple of our residential projects today that sort of explain kind of some of that approach, I suppose. So we're going to talk about Salmon House, which is on the left-hand side, and also Valletta on the right. But to kind of kick off, we want to sort of talk a little bit about our approach and about how we kind of think about colour and architecture. So we thought we'd just kick off with a little test to see how everyone can, how everyone's, you know, seeing things. So what we can see here is sort of how much of an impact kind of colour has on our understanding of space. So on the left-hand side, the images are in colour. On the right-hand side, it's the same image, but just black and white. And you can obviously see that the red and the green allow us to kind of differentiate between spaces, between these objects that you see on the kind of canvas. And obviously Joe Svalbers did kind of a number of research projects into this. But we really see how this kind of affects our understanding of space. I think artists understand this very clearly. You know, you've got things like colour theory providing depth. So here we've got Titian understanding that blue kind of pushes objects back into the picture plane, red pulling them forwards. So you've got Mary there kind of being pushed back and the character in the front kind of coming forwards out of the surface. And so you see how kind of even on 2D planes, people are understanding how they can create three-dimensional structures from that. And more recently, you've got people like Helle Jongerius investigating kind of curvature and the three-dimensionality of colour in very kind of nuanced ways. So that's just a little kind of overview of some of the things and techniques and kind of ideas that come up in some of our approaches to how we understand that architecture can actually, how colour can create space. And this really kind of played out through Salmon House. This is a new build house in the east of London. And I'll kind of come back to the sort of colour theory stuff in a bit, but to start with, I'll just kind of give you a little overview of the project itself. So this was a project for a new 3-bed house that was designed to be rented out. So it's sort of in some way speculative. It wasn't for a particular family. And we won the project after a sort of small competition between a couple of other practices. And we built the house for a private landlord. And this is the site for the house. So it's this kind of end of terrace space, which was kind of created from this series of 1950s houses running along here. And then it's sort of terminating at the edge of this Victorian terrace. And so the proposal became a way of kind of seeing the best bits of these two different approaches to kind of housing in London. Sort of a sort of system-built house on the left, concrete panels which then had actually been overclad in brick, and then on the right-hand side, the Victorian terraces from sort of 100 years previous. And so we wanted to produce something that was kind of new, was of its time, but also in some way kind of acknowledged its position on this corner. So you can see Salmon at the front and Rudolph Road on the side. So obviously we sort of test our approaches through iterative drawings, through models, and these drawings were really to try and test how the colours would kind of work against each other. And what we were looking for was a way of making the house generous and generous to the street. And so we ended up using complementary colours that would visually push apart from each other. So using colour theory to have something that would make this colour kind of expand the house. So we have a green plinth and then the complementary pink kind of upper surface that would then start to expand this house and push it out of the corner that it was on. And this was a way of kind of, using the position on the corner, but also a way of then increasing the kind of the volume and kind of generosity of this building. So yeah, testing materiality, testing the scale of that, the composition of it. We always use self-coloured materials. So here a kind of pink through-coloured render, and then a green terrazzo which lines the doors and windows as well as forming this plinth. So the kind of colour is always connected with a mattness or reflectivity, something that has a kind of has properties of its own as well. So this is showing how kind of a bit of a conversation between the building and its surroundings. So I was saying about our approach of trying to kind of fuse the two types of housing. So this, the sort of system-built housing, the 1950s housing, with its horizontal format of windows, which we kind of felt, while was sort of synonymous with the rest of the terrace that it was forming part of, wasn't really very good for bringing light into the building. And so instead we looked at the Victorian terraces, which you can see here in green, and their kind of vertical format of windows, and in a quite a dumb way, kind of just transposed the two across the top of each other. But that meant that we got the best bits, so the sort of vertical format of the large windows, and then the recesses of the render forming the kind of horizontal bands that would relate to the neighbouring house. And so again, in some way, kind of combining these two to sort of to form something that was a sort of, I don't know, sort of the best of both. And sort of in some way using this to give a richness to something that was quite flat, and make the most of this corner. So the kind of pattern and the fenestration carries around the corner in order to kind of have the conversation across the two sides of the building. So here you see it kind of completing the end of the terrace. But also, as I was saying, we kind of, through understanding that the colour is attached to the materiality, we started to find slightly unexpected things as we were designing and then building the house. So one aspect of that was that the roof tiles, while on a sunny day, they would go this dark black because they're reflecting the sky. On a cloudy day, which we have a lot of in the UK and have a very nice one today, the tiles would go this really wonderful grey. And so we wanted the house to kind of be seen in this way, and so started to design it to look its best on a cloudy day. And so the idea of something being seen on a cloudy day started to kind of play into various other architectural features, both in terms of the detailing of some of the render, but also the sort of final series of materials. So for example, this doorway became a space where you would catch shadows, but also could on a overcast day, but also it would shield you from the rain as you were kind of getting your keys out. So each of these moments would kind of have a little story about bad weather. But the entrance is also this way of kind of, is also sort of catching you and sort of bringing you in from the corner of the house. So quite a few things are sort of rotated on plan in order to kind of give you a sort of diagonal experience of the house, because the corner was so kind of important. So it's not really something that is about the facade. It's sort of about a kind of diagonal appreciation of it. So even the kind of bin store sort of bringing you around the corner. But those are kind of the elevations. So inside, we also designed it to be really generous for its occupants. We didn't know who they would be, but we wanted it to be a house that would be kind of a special place for people to live in. While on the ground floor, we were sort of fixed in terms of ceiling heights, really. What we did is made use of the volume of the roof, took out the loft, which isn't really used in rental properties, and gave the bedrooms 4-meter high ceilings. And so this created this kind of really generous vertical space. And then all the bedrooms have windows looking in two different directions. So kind of breaking up and opening the rooms onto the different roads sort of around the house. And I think just the one last thing is, I know at the start of the project, start of our kind of conversation, we explained that we work on kind of public projects, and that actually today we're talking about 2 private projects. But in some way, what's been amazing is that salmon, because of its position on this corner and because of its slightly kind of speculative nature, has actually been something that then people have reappropriated. And so we see kind of, this is a local fashion designer, and the previous person was a travel blogger, and they decided to kind of use the facade of the building as something that was kind of public, and to be able to kind of take photographs in front of it. And so we felt that's kind of an amazing way that actually this private project has then become something that is publicly used because of its kind of, I don't know, sort of almost stage set nature, which is a really lovely kind of outcome. So I think that is it, and I've run over time.
So the next project the second project and last project that we're going to talk about is Valletta House. Again, the site is in London. It's in West London, and this time it's a Victorian house that a family of 6 with 4 young girls wanted to extend. So when we first started the project, there were 3 girls. The 4th wasn't born yet, but they were all under the age of 3 because there were 2 twins. So they're very, very young. And the parents wanted, had bought a house a couple of years beforehand, but it's on a really quite a tight site. It has a garden that's north facing, and the garden again is quite small. And a small room up in the loft. So we wanted to enlarge the house, but not take too much space out of the garden. And we wanted to make the most of the spaces, to make the house kind of feel like it was larger than it was. So one of the techniques that we used was, again, kind of looking at how we could use colour as a way of kind of elevating the spaces, but also to enlarge the spaces, and perhaps to also create different kind of almost different weather conditions in the different rooms. And we've always been really fascinated by Corb's use of colour. But in particular, we were really interested in one of a research project that they did a few years ago, which was looking at the colour archaeology in Corbusier's buildings. And in particular, we were really interested in the use of colour and how he would often use it as a kind of reflective, for reflective reasons. So this wall here that looks bright orange is actually white. It just has a colour on the surface on the other side. So this became something that we were kind of really interested in the project, and a kind of technique of using different materials and different kind of curved surfaces as a way of reflecting colours into different colours into the spaces. We went through a kind of series of lots of kind of material investigations and testing out different kind of matte surfaces, shiny surfaces, and also kind of colour surfaces. So one of the things that we kind of decided on was that perhaps the kind of warmer colours, the pinks, the reds and the yellows were about kind of resting spaces, and then maybe the cooler colours such as the blues and the greens were more kind of transition spaces. And this is a view into the kitchen where we've started to kind of curve these some of the kind of walls, some of the ceilings, again as a way of kind of allowing light to kind of glide over surfaces rather than creating these kind of harsh shadows that might suggest a kind of smaller or a kind of more contained environment. We were also really interested in how we could bring light from above. So this is the Soane Museum, an image of one of the rooms in the Soane Museum in London. And what we really loved about this is the lanterns that were all have this kind of yellow tint to it. And Soane's idea was that he would bring Mediterranean light into London. And we always kind of really loved that idea. And then, of course, this is Ricardo Bafil's Muralla Roja in Cotte, where he's using these kind of blue and pink lanterns in the middle of his kind of apartment blocks. And it was amazing when we went to visit, they had like lots of different colour samples and paint samples. So it's obviously like something that they, you know, they continuously, and there was people painting it. So imagine it's a place that's continuously kind of painted. So the way that we kind of wanted to use this lantern was actually in this staircase that felt like, you know, obviously it kind of physically connects all the different floors, but it also could be a way of bringing light deeper into the plan of the house. And it became like a kind of game in a way that we wanted, so that the adults wanted to have their spaces. They wanted to live predominantly on the ground floor and first floor, and so the second floor became the space for the girls. So this staircase in some way was kind of designed around almost like a kind of snakes and ladders game, that the girls would climb up the staircase and get to their rooms up above. But we were really keen to kind of use materials that would slightly or use kind of forms that would suggest a kind of game in the staircase. So, for example, we use these kind of spheres at the end of the handrail that would suggest the kind of start of the game or the start of the ascent. And at the beginning, we used the kind of really cold marble, so that when they would touch it, they would immediately be alerted to, you know, to the fact that they're kind of climbing the stairs. And then here's one of the girls climbing up. And then at the end, you would have the sphere kind of announcing the end of the game. And this large lantern, and we use yellow as the kind of frame to kind of paint the frames and the kind of reveals in the windows and in the lanterns. And the idea was that it would reflect quite a warm colour, and perhaps not the colour that you would usually have or the light that you would usually have in London. So this is just a kind of plan drawing of the bedrooms. So there's 2 bedrooms that were added at the top with a kind of bathroom. But we also wanted to have, we used again these kind of curved openings and these kind of arched windows. And the idea was that each girl would have their own arched window to call their own. And on the outside, we used these upside down arches that were these cedar shingle, and they would be left in their kind of natural form. So when we first installed them, they're this kind of brown, kind of almost like red colour actually, and then slowly that will change and is already becoming grey over the years. And there was this idea that maybe as the girls grow up, that also the materials externally will also change with them. And this is the kind of final photograph with all the girls in the window, but the last one wasn't born yet. Yeah, and that's it.
Thank you very much. Right.
Well, just a quick comment before we open for questions. I think both presentations were perfectly done for this exercise, especially with showing the models and how you work with defining details. So of course this is a open conference for more people, but specifically for our exercise, I think it like perfect examples in both cases, how to show different things and how to test different things. So thank you very much.
A perfect match, yes, I think. Yeah, with Camille here, we were having a nod at each other every time there was a drawing that could be one of our students' comprehensive drawings. Of course, much better, but but they're getting there soon. Yeah, if is there any question? I think it would be great to have some questions from the students and or the rest of the audience. Or Philip. Yeah,
I have questions. I always have questions. I'm known for always having questions. Well, thank you so much for the presentation. So I can just throw one in the air to start. I really appreciated the presentations. I mean, I knew the work of both practices, but it's always better and much more interesting to actually see and hear the presentation in firsthand. And I have a question for S&M, and that is, it's a personal question, but I think you can answer it. If you can answer it, it would help us. It would help us in our own practice every day. Color. Color is a beautiful thing. I think that that it's probably one of the nicest and simplest tools we can use as architects, but many times it's received with a certain lack of hope or with a certain disbelief from the client side. And recently I read a text from an interview from Coolers where he said that it's very sad that after such a long career, he found out that the only thing the contemporary society can agree upon is beige. Beige is the only common denominator. And I wanted to ask you, how do you propose, negotiate, assume color in your projects with the client? So how do you bring this on the table? Are you expected to because of your previous work? Is this something you push up for? Is this something that you need to push a lot for? Or is this something that is accepted very naturally by your counterparts?
Do you want to answer it, Katrina, or Si? Oh, okay. Yeah, I think
you can start and then I'll add.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think it's a lot to do with kind of education and kind of bringing ideas to clients. And I think, yeah, we always start the conversation with clients very early. Because I think, yes, often when people are kind of considering projects, color isn't kind of necessarily one of the tactics or tools that they're kind of thinking of deploying, and at the same time, it's one that we always are thinking of using. So yeah, we start conversations very early, and it's amazing how much I don't know how people kind of think about color and how sort of colors have meanings or associations or uses, and kind of working through those things with clients is really interesting, because what they start out kind of thinking, you know, yeah, you're absolutely right, is kind of beige and sort of, you know, all these kind of tiny little pieces of color. And actually, as you go through a process of kind of having conversations about what color can do, what color could mean, what color could be kind of used for, they really develop a kind of confidence, you know, and a sort of taste. And I think it's really interesting to kind of see how some projects kind of start and then where they kind of end up getting to as well.
I think often also, you know, we work on a lot of projects that have very small budgets. So whether that's on the kind of public side, where, you know, every penny needs to count, and also on the kind of residential or private projects, we often work with small budgets. And one of the cheapest things that you can do is paint, you know, is colour, and it can completely transform a space and how you kind of feel in a space or how you experience a space. So it's a material that I think, you know, we often use and really enjoy using, but it's also like definitely underused and has like a huge amount of kind of potential. But the other thing is that there's the kind of conversation about color that you have with clients, but then at other stages of the with planning officers. So actually, in order to get permission to build a building that has unusual materials or color in it, is actually really challenging in the UK. And there's a real kind of push for beige brick, and it's it's kind of and it's really unfortunate because it's the go-to material, especially in like London. And brick is fine. It's a lovely material as well, but it doesn't mean that the whole city needs to become beige. So interestingly, whenever we kind of show our work to people in the UK or architects in the UK, their immediate question is, how did you get that through planning, or how did you get planning for that? Because it is a little bit different. But it don't just resort to beige all the time.
Thank you. It's amazing how we never discussed this together, but I think we said very similar things in the past. So it's really, the struggle is not, I don't think it's a Portuguese struggle or a British struggle. I think it's a global one. And the answer was very, very interesting. Thank you.
I think I just, if I have a question, I think it would be for, I'm not sure exactly how to phrase it to both practices at once, but what struck me is the opposition between the first project that Hadim has shown, because I'm trying to compare things that are comparable. And the first project that Hadim has shown is, I'm struck by the photograph of this terrace that is a domestic space, let's say detached from the street, but that tries to look like a street, or at least that's how I read it, with these very dry materials and this street lamp. I think you described it as such. And the opposition between this and the last images S&M have shown of the Salmon House, with, let's say, people in the street appropriating this thing because it is different, essentially, and because it has colors, as you mentioned. And I think, of course, so these two spaces are in different conditions, because one is accessible from the street, the other one is not, obviously. But so I think they are polar opposites in a way, or they can be read as such. But I think they also both try to challenge what a city is, because in a way, the Central project gives you something that you would not expect there, because you would expect something very domestic, and on the other hand, where you would expect an anonymous brick facade in London, you get something different. So I'm asking, in a way, my question could be, how much should or do you desire to challenge the anonymity of the city, and to what purposes, I think. So to both. Let's say, what is the role of the exception, to put it in other words?
Yeah. No, I don't know. I find okay. I talked about this street lamp, and it's true that the materials are quite dry somehow. But we have the feeling that the space is really domestic and is used as a true domestic space. But I think it's an interesting question in the sense that I think that if we would have had a project like the one in London, maybe the reaction would be the same as you do in London. But there, in this kind of terrace space, I mean, what we tried to do is a potential. So the potential is space, view, and this kind of inside, intimate wooden space. And then when you go out, you have to feel the scale of the city somehow. But then it's open to you also to, put plants, tables, play in it, whatever. So for us, the terrace was less like aesthetically speaking, it wasn't such the aim, to do something really drawn. It was more the aim of the space, simply to say, okay, inside you have 35 square meters that are pretty well drawn with a lot of details and quite warm, let's say. And then the outside space is just a potential, which is also 35 square meters of space, but it for us belonged to the city somehow, even though it's totally detached from it. So that was the ambiguity that we like to work with. But again, I think that, yeah, in another context, it's another reaction that we would have proposed maybe, so.
I think that term kind of belonging is really interesting. And I think that I suppose I'd kind of frame our response in terms of ownership. And obviously kind of property is very problematic in terms of ownership. You know, it's got a very particular legal structure in terms of kind of how people own spaces and have, you know, ownership over them. And yet the project that we were designing, you know, with Salman was a rental house. So it was always going to be rented out. There was always going to be a kind of speculative future user. We would never have a conversation with them about what they wanted. And yet we wanted to design something that would be their house and that they would feel ownership of. And I think trying to design something that had kind of a particular character where you might in some way imagine kind of who was going to live in there. And that you start to design kind of little pieces about that kind of day-to-day life, like how do you get your keys out when you're getting to the door? How do you take your bins to the bin store? You know, I think those sort of particular moments could be ways in which you could kind of imbue a certain sort of ownership into something that was otherwise quite generic and quite unspecific. And you know, I think, you know, that was really interesting to see or to hear you talking about kind of that interplay between kind of generic moments and specific moments on kind of large scale projects. And I think that really does come, you know, those ideas of ownership are being played out at the scale of the city or the school. But they also really, I think, really impact on domestic spaces, obviously, especially, you know, in current environments where it's very difficult to buy property, lots of people renting, and yet at the same time kind of wanting to create cities, buildings that, you know, people feel are homes and feel are homely and feel an ownership of and a connection to. So I think it's in some way really trying to deal with that problem of sort of ownership and property.
Yeah, I think that's the right answer. In your project, I really like this splint somehow. It's in between outside, you know, like this public space and really private, even though it's rental. You can not just identify, but even the space in itself is drawn. You know, the door that goes a bit inside, and there is a kind of in between that I quite like in that, and I think it's really smart to do it with this rental. But when you have a private client, for example, we did the apartment under, so it's a simpler renovation, but with different qualities. But what we really want to provide was basically space that normally in the city as an owner you have less and less. And here to have this roof, when you visit first the roof, you say, okay, there is nothing to add but to make a terrace, you know? And so in this sense, I think it's just giving square meters somehow, the view and simple elements, and retain yourself to designing too much in this sense. Because the owner has already a space, so you give, yeah.
So, questions from our students, come on. More pressure.
Should tell them discounts for the grade. If they don't ask questions, they get 1 grade less.
Yes, that's true.
I did that in my class, and now they ask too many questions.
No, actually, we should have done that.
Yeah, they're a bit shy. That's
Okay, but then I'll ask just one quick question. One of the main challenges that our students have also been facing, which is not extremely easy one, is to relate the inside and outside, and how much you detail outside and inside, and like this like difference of scales between a general proposal and then how actually you develop it. Maybe it's more a generic question, like how is your process like from the beginning till end, like if you have like a general idea for everything and then you go into detail, if it's a parallel thing. So maybe a question on how you work. Of course, you also explain it a bit in your presentations, but maybe in a more generic, practical way. Maybe you could just develop it.
Can I just to add to that question? I think relating to what I was saying before, I think both presentations were talking, in my ears at least, of that relationship, so between interior and exterior. But I think with opposite vectors in a way. So because I very literally, so in the Central project, for example, for the IMAL, you said the street enters the building and becomes an interior, right? And well, I see, let's say, I think a lot of, let's say, perhaps part of what S&M has showed can be interpreted as a reverse, let's say, dynamic, perhaps not in the same ways, but I'm wondering, like, do you think it goes in a direction or not, or are both things considered, let's say, in pure equity or in parallel, or what is the process in relationship to that?
I think what we tend to do is we really enjoy kind of looking into the kind of narratives of projects. So we really like to work with kind of stories, and so in terms of how we kind of start projects, we like to kind of really understand the kind of context and the kind of history, but also really understand who will be using the spaces that we're designing for. And I think, you know, sometimes it's not, our buildings don't necessarily look like they maybe fit into the context or are the same as the context. They're often quite different, but they do very clearly kind of pick up on what we see are the best bits of the area or the context. So for example, with Salmon, we had the windows, the two different windows, the Victorian windows and the 70s houses windows. But we were also looking at the kind of 70s like porches. And these became kind of, I suppose, tools to, you know, that we kind of use to develop ideas around. So in terms of how it relates to the street and how it relates to its context. So for example, you know, the front garden is a very common kind of occurrence in the UK. Every house has its front garden. But more recently, they've just become places where people dump their bins. So it's just full of bins. So it's no longer this kind of sociable space where people kind of, as they go into their house, kind of have a chat over the fence. And so we decided to kind of make a special container for the bins so that they were kind of away and you could actually use that space for kind of narrative is something that we often use as a kind of tool to kind of generate our designs, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. I think that, yeah, it's a bit the same. what I'm quite fascinated in, it's how simple architecture can put in a relation many aspects of a program, city, space, this inside, outside, and these kind of things. And for example, for this email, we knew that, okay, the budget was quite scarce. We knew that the program wasn't really so bold. The building was nice, but nothing was really incredible or particular. And so what we tried to do since the beginning is to define a kind of space which is this in-between, but that can bring multiple layers of narratives. So that's the fascination that we have, how a simple space can have those layers of narratives that you can, with the client, you can through the space discuss different things, but then you can think about this inclusive space that you invite people inside the building. How does it work? That then it's a strong specialty, this volière, but at the same time, it's a filter. So it's strongly defined, but it's a filter that plays different roles. So it's this kind of things that we like to do. And I think that to answer a bit to the first question, it's not that we place one narrative above another. It's always a kind of iterative process with many point of views, many layers, many parameters, and that we try during the competition process, for example, or the conception process, to reduce it somehow to few elements. And those few elements allow us to be really precise and there take the room to design nicely a lot of things, and then leave a lot to more generic spaces. So it's not that generic is good and specific is bad, it's just that for us, we always try to have those two levels or two point of views. Because nowadays you are more and more speaking about, for example, those generic structures. If you look at Brüter Baukunst housing that has won the Prix Ecker for housing in France, it's a kind of, they are talking about this revolution that if you make generic spaces, it's kind of ecological, because in 20-40 years it can become something else, which is true somehow. So maybe when you're too specific, then you don't have this kind of projection. But at the same time, we're pretty sure that architecture has kind of history and that it's a moment at the same time. And so I think that it's what we're trying to do, is to bring those moments, those particular moments inside buildings that have the possibility to evolve somehow, but at the same time, they crystallize kind of way of thinking of a moment. And so, yeah, working on those two aspects together help us actually also to answer the client brief, and at the same time to make room for ourselves also to really have fun in designing a few specific elements that we like. So yeah, it's this kind of iterative process that that we are interested in.
Great. I think there's one last question, I think, from Nina, and then we'll all have to go to eat something, I suppose. Nina?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, like when you're working with color, do you work in a certain manner to translate this physical color in a digital environment? Like, for example, when you have a competition or something like this, that it's super important to be accurate with the color, how you do it in the screen.
Yeah, I think obviously color is incredibly changeable and variable, and that's really exciting. And I think as architects, we have an obsession of like controlling things, controlling buildings, controlling people, all those sorts of things. There's sometimes something really nice about having color that can be changeable or flexible, or you don't quite know what the outcome is going to be. And that even when you do deliver something that's kind of particular or codified, that it will change depending on the time of day, time of year, weather condition, as the sort of light around it changes, and the kind of relativity of the color kind of changes as well, which is really, really exciting. But yes, we use kind of digital tools. We've got various kind of digital color readers, and then obviously, you know, mountains of, of swatches of different color systems. I think I think a lot of it though comes down to kind of how you kind of, I don't know, in some way how you talk about color. You know, at what point is something light red and when is it pink? You know, and sort of how you actually have discussions around what is in somebody else's head in terms of color and what's in your head. And those kind of, you know, meetings of where you're trying to kind of have a conversation around something that, you know, is completely in your own mind's eye. And actually, if sometimes people will look at, you know, I could look at something, you can look at something, and we might say that they're a different color, you know, and so actually the kind of the conversation and the way that you end up kind of conveying that becomes the really interesting bit, because actually, even if you codify something, you know, absolutely, like this is definitely the color, somebody else might think about it in a totally different way. So I think it's really interesting that actually it's maybe not about the kind of particularity of how you deliver it, but it's actually about kind of what it might mean to somebody.
For example, for the school in Dilbeek, this pink school, what was funny is that the color wasn't never a topic. So basically, because we had a program and there was this competition, we have won the competition because, yeah, you answer in special ways on what they asked for. And I said that it wasn't a topic, but basically they asked us still during the competition if it was a pink school or not. And we said, yes, for now we imagine it as pink, but it can become something else later on. But then we never had time to come back to this pink topic. And so basically we kept it. And people got just normally used to it, you know? And they were like, yeah, it's normal to have a pink floor in this huge school and to have those brownish varnish tiles and this kind of. And then it became a kind of common imaginary, because we had always avoided to talk about, and because it's also a public building, huh? So you don't talk about taste. When you win a competition, they are not saying, we like it or not, because they cannot argue with this. And so you have this kind of false authorship somewhere, you know, that you are quite proud of. And yeah, so it goes like that. But for example, for the other school in Templeur, that will be, I think the specialty is nice, but it will be a bit rough. Everything will be grayish, black, nothing. So I think, again, it depends on the client, on the context. And
I have one question to close the ARCHI that you can answer in one word each, the three of you. What is your favorite color?
Rainbow.
That's okay. Maybe we keep the answer for another time, or as you want. Okay, I think that's it. We meet again in